There we go.
And, okay, you're sharing screen. Everyone sees it? Okay, sorry for the interruption. I just remembered.
Quite all right. Again, not a tax attorney. That is not what I do. You are not going to learn how to evaluate this document from a taxation perspective. You are going to learn how to analyze this document from a layperson's perspective. Does anyone want to maybe chime in on the chat why you might want to read a 990? Why would we even come together to do this today?
Or if you're here, you want to
Find out how a nonprofit that I might give money to spends their money every year.
Yeah, from a donor perspective, what's even happening at the organization? Where's my money going for?
To see if they're on their board or not.
Yeah. Chrissy says in the chat to be a better board member. Absolutely. And I think better, maybe more informed board member. Cassandra says evaluate a charity you're considering donating so you can see how they use it. Absolutely. And then Laura says, as a member of the board, we have to review the 990. So understanding it is a great step. I 100% agree with you all. So what are we going to learn today? What is the 990? So the 990 purpose is to critically assess the financial health of a nonprofit organization. What is this form even to begin with? So it is required of all nonprofits, really 501(c)s, to annually report out from a fiscal standpoint what they're doing with their money. Now, this is a tax form, so this is on a national level. So theoretically, any tax exempt organization would be filing this on an annual basis. The government says you need to file it at least 6 months after your fiscal year close, once a year. So theoretically, you would be able to find almost any organization's 990 to do this type of evaluation. How might you do that? I referenced earlier GuideStar, now called Candid, is a tool that was really quick to aggregate this data from a national perspective. It started in kind of the mid-90s, and there were different levels of completion on the site, kind of like a Better Business Bureau type charity, star, gold, silver, platinum. But I always used it for access to the 990. I would say now Open 990, which uses ProPublica as a data source, is slightly easier to use. It's what I recommend now. You would start by finding the organization and reviewing the PDF. The PDF on Open 990/ProPublica is all the way down at the bottom. If you haven't grabbed a 990 to review today, keep scrolling all the way down under downloads. Now, our goal for tonight is to learn how to dissect this dense PDF by utilizing kind of 10 focus questions that you can ask yourself to evaluate the nonprofit that you have selected. So what I've got over in the corner is a screenshot of when I searched for the Junior League of Phoenix. Something came up. Does anyone care to describe the distinction between Inc. and foundation here?
Kimberly, why don't you do that as our president of the foundation?
Vice president.
Vice president.
Jill.
Jill.
Jill's on. Jill can do it. She's the president.
The Junior League of Phoenix Foundation is a separate 501(c)(3), which is set up to raise money to support the mission of the Junior League of Phoenix. So we are our own organization. Pretty much we are all members of Junior League of Phoenix, Inc., as we call them. We call them Inc. But we are separate. We're totally separate organizations. We raise our own money, and then we grant Inc. money at the end of the year for the following administrative year.
Makes sense to me. I imagine this is a song and dance you have perfected over time, a pretty common question and distinction that your members and your board members have learned to understand. One thing I'll point out on the search box here is within parentheses, you see the different tax IDs. Now, because the 990 is a tax form, you want to be aware of the different tax IDs that are assigned to the various organizations, because it's how the government keeps them straight, but also you as a consumer, you can, track the difference between Inc. and Foundation at the Phoenix level, but also the difference between, say, AJLI, which would also come up under a Junior League search versus the Junior League of Seattle, or, so on and so forth. Our first question. Now, if you haven't already pulled up your 990 on your screen, your device, now's the time to do so. You want to prepare it. We're going to start scrolling. These are long, unsearchable PDFs. So my goal tonight isn't to walk you through each of the various sections, but at least figure out how to navigate. And we'll spend a lot of time on this very first page. So if someone in the chat can maybe give me a thumbs up when they're ready, or a thumbs up in the room, get your 990s. Okay, seeing a few. So the W's: who, what, where, and when. So we're going to look at the top of that first box. And tonight, the example is Junior League of Phoenix, Inc. So I'm going to be presenting from that perspective. So when you first find the 990 using either GuideStar or Open 990, you got to figure out, am I actually looking at the right organization? You do that at the top by verifying the name of organization in line C. Sometimes there's a DBA name. So it's not a red flag that you wouldn't have Inc. here if Junior League of Phoenix is the actual name. You want to check that the address is actually the organization that you're looking for. I work for the YMCA of Greater Seattle. As I imagine, there are a lot of Ys in Phoenix. So understand that distinction between an umbrella organization and a local chapter. So I believe this is your address here. Over in box D, the employer identification number, also known as the EIN, employer identification number, will be found over there. So oftentimes, and if JLP doesn't have this, it should theoretically be on the website, so that a prospective donor or external audience could match that number with the 990. Also, these days, Google can do it for you. Just Google JLP EIN or tax ID will probably show that up, but because you have the two organizations, the Foundation and Inc., that might be an area to clarify. The tax year. So because the Junior League year falls in that strange month, you'll notice for the 2020 calendar year or tax year, and it actually says, so June 1 to 5/31, but this is using the tax form 2020. So I mentioned this only because you want to be aware as to what fiscal years you're looking at. Typically, all of the open source resources are going to be about 18 months to 2 years behind the actual calendar year that you're currently in reviewing it. So this to me is not a red flag. This was the fiscal year ending 5/31. We're now just coming up on the second fiscal year, which ended 5/31/22. And we know that the organization has up to 5.5 months to file their 990, and then that would go through the interwebs and get posted to the website. So this calendar delay is what I would say is on track. This next box, box E, where Jennifer Elser's name is, that's likely the CEO or executive director. In junior league land, that's the president. Over here in box G, gross receipts. So gross income gives you a quick snapshot of how large this organization is and what activity happened in that fiscal year. So gross receipt is simply all of the money that was received in calendar year 21-22 for this organization. Down here in box L, year of formation, 1935. Gives you a quick snapshot into how long this organization may have been operating. I think for JLP, I'd be interested in learning the difference of the foundation and Inc. year. I don't know if anyone has that handy. I think someone was reviewing it. When was the foundation formed?
2003, I think our letter from the IRS is from 2004.
What does it say in the 990 for the foundation?
I don't, Kimberly has it.
Maybe type it in the chat if you find that in box L, Kimberly. And then, to no one's surprise, state of legal domicile, Arizona. What might be a different type of organization. I think most of the room today chose pretty hyper local organizations, but there could be a nonprofit that spans a region where they may operate in California but be based in Arizona. So something to watch out there. It may be insignificant. It may make your spidey senses go off. Why might that organization need a different state to operate out of? Finally, a very important box. So this is in line I, 501c. Now, typically when folks are talking about charity, they're referencing 501c's. Now, what is a 501? Why are they all called C's? Why does it even matter? So 501c, the C stands for citation. We're actually citing a type of a line within tax code here. And the numbers 1 through about 30 actually correlate to different types of organizations that the government has said, we are not going to tax your business revenue. You are tax exempt. So most charities fall within that 501c3. I'm just going to pull over and put in the chat the Wikipedia for 501c's. So there is over nearly 30 types of organizations that actually qualify for no taxation on that business revenue. Maybe you've seen that terrible meme that's like, the NFL is a nonprofit. It's not totally accurate. The NFL is not a nonprofit. The NFL is a 501c, I believe, business league 6. So its revenue is not taxed. It is not a charitable organization. Just a distinction. You will notice organizations should have this like at the bottom of their website. They will absolutely have this in box I of their 990. Why is it important? So the biggest distinction I want you to take away tonight is the difference between 501c's and C3s and C4s. To a certain extent, you might see C8s if any of you are from sororities, where membership organizations dues are not tax deductible. So that would be an example of 8. C4s are typically associated with lobbying. So those contributions, well, they may be tax exempt, they are not tax deductible. So I can write off, my $100 to a charity, which would qualify under C3. I could not do that if I contribute to a C4. Questions there?
So George, question on my 990, underneath the name, still in the name of the organization box, it has like a percent and then it has a person's name. Why would it have that? What's the?
Oh, what organization is this?
The Junior Achievement USA.
Is that the national organization or the local organization?
No.
That's interesting. I've never seen that. Let's keep watching for how they may represent the national organization, number one, and two, who's actually reporting up through this like 990. Is it the national CEO? Is it a local CEO? Is it an individual potentially impersonating Junior Achievement, which pretty well reputable organization that you may have found a 990 like a fake foundation type thing. Let's keep watching though. That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, like the name and address of the principal officer just has president and CEO. Jack, whoever, but yeah, okay, just. Interesting.
I think in general, this is a tax form. This should be pretty buttoned up and really dry, right? So if you see red flags, it's probably a red flag. Moving on, we're still on the very first page. So after you've identified your who, what, where, and when, you're going to go down to the second half of that first page. And you're trying to figure out, where are they making money? Where's the income stream? So some boxes to be aware of. Box number one, this should be a truncated version of the organization's mission statement. And JLP says, we're a network of women empowered as leaders to create sustainable community change. I'd say done. That's accurate. Boxes 3 to 5 over here. So you want to evaluate board size. That's box number 3, number of voting members of the governing body. So governing versus non-governing, that could be a distinction that to be aware of. Looks like you have had 9 board members during this fiscal year. They are all independent according to box 4. In line number 5, it looks like you had 2 employees of the Junior League of Phoenix and 991 volunteers. Right. So I think if someone were looking at this, not knowing what a junior league is, understanding that a junior league is volunteer run and powered, they might say, what? Why so many volunteers? No staff? Are they actually doing anything? We, of course, know that that's not a red flag for a junior league, volunteer powered organization. So boxes kind of 3 through 6, those are your people counts. And this second, you can't see my mouse over here, contributions in grants underneath your revenue section. So prior year versus current year. So remember that date that we pulled from the top of the form. So 2 fiscal years ago is the current year that this report is pulling from, 2021. Prior year is going to be 1920. So just remember that in your head throughout the document, because it only refers to prior and current year. It's a single comparison document. Line 8. So those are your contributions and grants. This is contributed revenue or development or fundraising activity. Who gave money to the organization is in line 8. Line 9, program service revenue. These are revenue generating programs. So for say my organization, the YMCA, This is where we might put swim lesson revenue, day camp revenue. This is earned products. For, I think someone had a food bank. If there are actual sales of anything, so it could be a sale of, you know, highly discounted food stuff. I don't know. Now I'm making up food bank models, but it would have to be a transactional cost to show up in line 9 that the organization is doing.
Like Junior League cookbooks, or is that a fundraiser?
I think cookbooks for at least Seattle always were run through contributions, but that's a great question. We had stopped selling cookbooks by my age. That could be captured in other revenue. It's not necessarily a program of the organization.
I'd be like, if we leased out our facility to other organizations, that would be income, because that was one of the things we had to be concerned about when we talked about, did we want to do that? We had to be careful how much revenue we generated there,
Yeah.
because of a certain percentage, I thought.
Yeah, I actually think that's in line 11 as other revenue. It's not necessarily a program, a critical function that the organization has adopted. It's more of a time-bound activity, which is why it would end up in other. Obviously, there's a little bit of gray area right there, right? Because you could amass a bunch of land and decide that it is your key activity, and then you would roll that into program service revenue. There's actually a section later, it's called PSA, program service allocation, where you do identify the various key program areas of the organization, and you tie revenue or expenses to each of those. So for here, what we're talking about is income. So really 8 and 9 are critical here. You want to ask yourself, why might this have swung over time? Why might this have changed between fiscal year 2019, or sorry, fiscal year 2020 and fiscal year 2021? Does anyone have a guess?
COVID, we didn't have rummage.
You didn't have rummage. Okay, so that fairly significant swing between the prior and the current year, we can explain, right? Along with the rest of the world, year to year looks different. Line 10, investment income. So there's a separate section that actually should show pull out those changes, but fairly flat year over year. Other revenue, I think that's where that lease came in, which makes sense. And then you add it all up, a little bit down on the previous fiscal year, but that's to be expected. Okay. Expenses. Where are they spending? Sorry, this is the third question now. Where are they spending their money? Those are defined as expenses right below it. So we're going to pay attention to this box over here. So line number 13, which I find super interesting, is grants and similar amounts paid with a total. So is this organization a granting organization?
No signal. Use this JLP. We invite you. One check. Connecting to LEDs and others.
Sorry, that's our TV speaking.
It's like, I missed that question. So yes, right, JLP provides grants to community. And you'll notice it actually refers you to a different part of the filing, part 9, column A, that will tie that up for you. So it looks like between 2 fiscal years ago and last fiscal year, there was a decrease in grants, but I think that makes sense. Your employee totals or benefits paid to and for members, 0. I think that's what we would expect for a junior league. And then salaries. So, about $75,000 for 2 employees. That makes sense to me. Line 16A, so professional fundraising fees. This would indicate that you paid either a professional fundraiser or professional event planner of some sort to conduct some fundraising activity. It's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm a professional fundraiser. Right? I bring in more revenue than I expend, but you do want to ask, okay, well, why did it double between the prior year and the current year? Does that make sense? And then also compare that against the organization size. So, if I saw $1 million organization and they're spending $850,000 and not making significant revenue for that fundraising activity or contract, that would be a flag. No, 16A are fundraising fees. So that's the direct cost of an activity. Total fundraising expenses, slightly larger, pulled out through part 9. This would be the full cost of that event. So I'm making a guess here. Looks like an event consultant, $18,000, pretty transactional, small. But then in comparison to full fundraising expenses, that seems to make sense to me for this type of organization.
Jordan, I have a question.
Yeah.
I know like our salaries are small because we only have 2 staff members, but at the 990 I'm looking at, it's, $15 million is
Yeah.
Expense the salaries, but it's, a lot, they're a much larger organization. Is there a percentage that should be kind of what you're looking for? Because I've heard like, Goodwill, their CEO is paid ridiculous amounts of money. And so people are hesitant to give to Goodwill. If you're looking to see what is a reasonable ratio of salaries to the income that they bring in, is there a percentage out there that you should be looking for?
I think it's a nuanced question that you brought up. Can you tell me which organization you're looking at?
Arizona Humane Society.
Humane Society. Okay. So I'm going to make some assumptions. Pretty large regional organization. What is that line for employees add up to?
The total employees was.
So line 15.
Line 15, salaries was 15,308,820. I'm sorry, $15,308,828.
And what's the organization size? So go all the way down. We're kind of skipping ahead, but all the way down to the very bottom. How large is the organization?
What line number?
Let's see. It is at the very bottom, and I apologize, I didn't reopen my PDF.
We're on you all.
It is 22 net assets or fund balances.
22 is 63,772,891.
Okay, so 15 of 60, so about 25% of the organization operations.
Understanding, so, they have doctors that are working there. So, I'm not thinking that that's an unreasonable number. I was just wondering if there's like a percentage of you want to be looking, like what would be the red flag as to how much is too much that they're paying in salaries?
We are going to go into the section where you look at essentially executive pay later. And I think that's going to help you with your question. I think in terms of percent, what I like to look for is kind of less than 2% for CEO pay. It's got to make sense for the organization, though. I think we could have a full dialogue on hospital CEO pay, but I think we can agree that hospital CEOs are important people, and we want them to be knowledgeable and professional. I think if when we go into that employee section, if it's very clear that one employee or even a group of employees may be overcompensated, it would come up there. So let's come back to you, I think in question 7.
Thank you.
Other questions about revenue and expenses?
Yeah, I have one question. So for line 14 for the benefits paid to our board members, like if we paid for like specific training for our members that was like outside of AJLI or anything like that, would that go under that section or what would be?
Yeah, that's a good question. So members for tax purposes, right? So this is, remember, a tax document. The junior leagues are referring to members as like constituents, a type of constituent. This tax document is really looking at a membership organization. So think of the fraternity or sorority model, where it's highly transactional, less experiential. And it would be like, I'm taking you on a trip and I need to disclose that to the government to potentially look at misuse of funds, where you're just paying for the founder's trip or paying for an executive to go do various things. For us, member is more aligned with program service, because that's part of our charitable mission. And I shouldn't bunny ear that, but right, like if our members are the program for Junior League. So it's a little bit of an odd distinction for the form.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Question number 4, is there a pile of gold? So we're going to look at total net assets and fund balances here at the very bottom. So it would appear that the Junior League of Phoenix has some assets, right? So I don't know where this $2.2 million are from, but they're going to be detailed in part 10, line 16. My guess is you probably have some sort of endowment investment account. You probably have some real estate. And for an organization size of, $500,000, 4 times that amount would not raise a red flag to me. It also may suggest this comparison here, surplus or deficit year, you would be able to see that balance change over time, right? So it looks like between these 2 fiscal years, there was a surplus. It may also suggest a liquidation of assets, right? If it drastically trended down, well, what happened? Did they sell all the cookbooks? I mean, did they sell the building? Yeah, it's something like that. Why would they have reduced all of their assets? Does that pass kind of the sniff test? In the same respect, maybe there's a huge jump. Is it all investments, or are they, say, running a capital campaign? They're actively fundraising for more contributions so that later, they're going to buy a new building, they're going to have a major construction project, etc. So, it may suggest some stuff. It's not necessarily a bad thing to see those numbers change, but it does give you a scale of what they oversee. And then a little addendum on the very bottom, part 2, the signature block. This should be a real person. It shouldn't be made up. I forget who had a percentage. Was that just in the organization name?
And actually the same name is the person that's in the sign here.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Theoretically, this is a person who has oversight of the organization, likely up at the top of the page. They do actually sign the document, but it's redacted when it goes online. So Jenny did really sign the 990. You do want to check underneath paid preparer use only. This should be a real auditor. This should be a firm that is not made up. I mean, Clifton Larson Allen, real firm. third party, it should likely, not be so-and-so's family name, right? It would be a red flag if it was, say, all in the family. You want the preparer to be nonpartisan and really coming from a third party perspective. Okay. You're not gonna keep scrolling. We are in part 3, statement of program service accomplishments. So PSA, program service allocation, accomplishments, it's changed. This is a section about program expenses. The organization should be able to describe its programs and activities. And if it sounds shady, it probably is. It should make sense. So JLP is an organization of women, promoting volunteerism, developing potential of women, improving community effective action, leadership, and trained volunteers. Yes, that's the mission. It makes sense. As the reader now, 4A should jump down to have maybe 2 to 5 activity areas. The reader, so you, should be able to compare the various amounts and decide if that's an actual activity of the organization. Now, the descriptions do matter here, and there should be descriptive data of what happened. So what even is this program? So looks like for this fiscal year, the St. Vincent de Paul Committee did a lot of things, right? So inaugural year, can't see my mouse, inaugural year, you invested $15,000. There's that 15. So that ties some results. You were able to grow in food distributions. Lots of information here. I would say this qualitative and quantitative information can be helpful for understanding what the organization even does. One note, and I would say this explanation from JLP is really long. It's actually more information than I think I've seen in a lot of 990s, and I read them quite frequently. Typically, you can't evaluate a program's efficacy. So what does that mean? Even if JLP, sorry, you spent $51,000 and you gave away $15,000, I can't say whether or not that $15,000 was a good investment. You try to make a case for it below, but that is a longer explanation. What do other people see within this section? And this is just continued, so it actually went down for quite a few different explanations.
Mine is blank, so it includes the expenses, but there's no additional data whatsoever.
They don't even describe it, like
They didn't describe
ponies.
it. No, there's like $2.5 million of expenses, and then there's nothing listed.
Does it
That'd
say
be a
to
red flag.
refer to a different page or see attachment?
It does say see additional data. Does that mean that there would be an attachment?
So
Okay.
you're gonna want to scroll and you're gonna want to look for, we're in section 4A through however many letters. This is a more common use of this section where it says, we needed extra space, go to the end. So keep scrolling and I think you'll find it.
Awesome, thank you.
What do other folks see in this section?
For the Humane Society, it talks about their 3 main programs that they have, and it gives a lot of statistics on like number of lives saved, number of spay and neutered animals that were spayed and neutered, how many, the medical technicians are on the road 365 days a year and rescued more than 6,000 abused, injured, and abandoned animals. So it gives a lot of like facts and data on their metrics.
And that to me passes the proverbial sniff test, right? What should the Humane Society be doing? They should be helping animals. And it looks like they are doing that. Total expenses here. I didn't put a box here, but including grants of, so that's that pass-through money that an organization may provide. And then total program expenses, this would tie to the earlier page for program expenses. So again, the question is, what does the org do? This should make sense if you have any sort of inkling as to why you would be looking up this organization. It should explain itself. If it says absolutely zero, that would be a red flag. The next question. So you're gonna scroll down over the accomplishments. You're gonna go to part 4, IV, checklists of required schedules. And we're gonna look at question number 4. So for 501c3s, those charitable organizations, did the organization engage in lobbying? Yes or no? It's not a bad thing to engage in lobbying, but you want to make sure that the organization has a reason to do so. And if they mark yes, they're required to complete Schedule C, Part 2, which you would find at the very end of the document, which would outlay which lobbyists they paid and how much. So that could send you on a different type of Google searching. And, you know, for the 501c3, you want to evaluate why they would even be lobbying to begin with. So, you know, we talked about hospitals earlier. Does a hospital need to engage in lobbying? I mean, their whole purpose is to help people, right, get well. But healthcare is a highly regulated industry. They may have legislation that deeply affects their operations. So provided you can make some connections like that, you just want to use your imagination as to why they would pay someone to get in front of a legislator. Also, if the organization does say yes, you would want to look at who that lobbyist is. Try to infer maybe what side they're on, maybe what type of relationships they may have. So JLP did not lobby. That doesn't surprise me. Did anyone's organization check yes?
Mine did.
Whose is that?
This is Jessica. And I had Philadelphia Children's Hospital, so CHOP. And they did, but when I looked at the lobbying activities, it's mailing to members of the legislator. There are a few grants to other organizations for lobbying purposes. There's a little bit of direct contact with legislators, their staff, and government officials. But in total, it's less than $1 million.
Yeah. And so something I'll point out here, because we did have a yes answer, have a section 501H election during that tax year. And so a 501c3, that charitable organization, can actually increase the percentage threshold to spend more dollars on lobbying for a specific year, for a specific purpose. It can't be done in perpetuity, but you can elect to have a lobbying year. For why that might make sense, I have to assume it's government cycles and either certain legislation or certain elections. You would want to do that. For example, you know, Washington, or a SPAC. So say your junior league has a public action committee, state public action committee. I don't think Arizona leagues do, but California does, Florida does, Georgia does, Washington has a defunct one. you might pay a lobbyist to help engage with legislators for a purpose that makes sense for your organization. So, Junior Leagues of Seattle have done a lot of work with foster youth. That may be an area that women decide to take on from a legislative standpoint. So you can pay, again, section 501H elections, called 501H election. You can elect for that threshold to be, I believe, up to $1 million for a certain fiscal year of lobbying underneath a 501c3. If it passes that threshold, you would want to look into a separate 501c4 where lobbying activities, you can spend 100% of your revenue on that. So for example, I give to Human Rights Campaign. So operationally, they defend LGBTQ people and persons, and they also do lobbying. So, the 501c3 is working one-on-one and also within systems. The 501c4 is talking about bathroom bills to legislators. So it may be appropriate pairing of class C3s and C4s for a certain org purpose. You want to check, make sure that lobbying is relevant to the organization's mission. Are there lobbyists involved? Now the next section, it's actually this section, part 4, is really long. My hint for you here is to look for yes. Now, it's going to trigger a separate form filing, and all you need to do is ensure that that makes sense for the purpose of the organization. So within JLPs, did the organization report a total of more than $15,000 for professional fundraising expenses? If yes, which you said yes, you have to fill out part 9, column A. If yes, from part 9, go fill out schedule G. That's at the very end. All the schedules are down at the very end. Yeah. What do you see? Maybe not a question. Interrupt me if it was. So the second yes, did the organization report more than $15,000 of event gross income and contributions? If yes, complete Schedule G Part 2. So we're going to check that one out. The section's really long. So does anyone see any yeses that you're like, huh, that's interesting? Cassandra. What do you see, Cassandra?
So I've got Aunt Ria's Foundation, which is an HIV/AIDS type organization in Phoenix, and so they said yes to over 15,000. And I scrolled way down to the bottom to Schedule G, and it was actually really interesting because they've got most of what their organization is known for is doing like 3 or 4 big events a year, and their numbers that they're reporting out are like net, $360,000 in fundraising. So I didn't realize they were that big.
Yeah. And I think, for an organization, particularly health related, right, they need to rely on the generosity of other community members outside their recipient base, right? If I am a client or a patient, I'm coming to them for help likely.
Right.
So it doesn't raise a flag to me. In fact, it makes more sense that they would be highly reliant on external fundraising.
Yeah.
So I'll point out some of the part 4 questions. So you have to verify in question 1 that you're a 501c3. You have to complete Schedule A. The second question, are you required to complete Schedule B? That's a donor list, and we'll talk about that in a few questions. The Junior League of Seattle, question number 8, actually says yes to a collection of art. Now, why do we have a collection of art? It's actually a program of the Junior Leagues of Seattle. We have 50 art pieces and an art curriculum that travel to kids' schools and libraries, and our members docent those pieces. So that's an actual program. I don't have the line in front of me, but another one is, does this organization have an international bank account? Well, the Junior League of Seattle probably shouldn't, but if you're working in any type of international aid, there's an organization in Seattle that works in Vietnam to remove landmines. So they would mark yes. They have people on the ground in Vietnam. They would mark yes. So you want to the organization's mission within this section, and the best way to do that, the best red flag that the government has decided, is to make them check yes and further explain it. So you're going to find that all throughout part 4, and you'll be pointed to various schedules at the end of the document. Does anyone have like a crazy yes they'd like to describe? One person, when I was giving this training, there was a question about tanning booths, and I was like, that's very specific. I have to guess someone was money laundering through like a tanning salon. Like, why would that even be added to a national document? It's like the hairdryer in the bathtub warning. So another one to point out, box 21, did the organization give away more than $5,000? Any domestic organization or domestic government? You got to explain, why are you giving money? Is that relevant? Is it an activity that organization should be doing?
Now, mine had a lot of yeses related to like land and stuff like that. And that's because I know the Arizona Humane Society just purchased land and they're building their new facility. So
Yeah.
yeses all make sense to me.
Yeah, that makes sense, right? And if you were to compare that organization's activities over time, they probably checked no for several years. And this happened to be the year that the transaction hit the finances, and then they have to report it. Any other interesting yeses you'd like to bring forward to the group? Okay, we'll move on. Question 8, who's involved? So this is now, we were in part 4, now we're going to part 7, compensation of officers. So this is where you will find everyone who is highly ranked in the organization, is what I'll say. Jenny, here again, she claims to have only worked 5 hours a week as president, which I don't believe for a minute, but that's nice. She wrote that. And 1 hour a day, she's got it done. Reportable compensation. So column D, you'll want to match up with that CEO pay. As we all know, it is a volunteer organization and we are not getting paid, so the zeros make sense here. Someone asked a question earlier about CEO pay. Tell me about what you see in column D here.
Column D, well, mine starts off with all the board members. They're all compensated 0.
Yes.
Trying to find oh, here we go, Dr. Hanson. So his reportable compensation was $383,934.
And I think if I remember, the organization size is like 60 million or so.
Big.
And I mean, that's reasonable. It sounds like they do a lot of good work, and I think CEO pay in the 2 to 3s, probably not that unusual to see.
Yeah,
Is it
I mean,
ethical? That's a totally different question, but is it unusual? No. It's, I think, less than 0.5% of total org size. So,
others that are listed are somewhere between like 100,000. I think the next highest one is the VP of Strategy and External Affairs, which is 196. But he's the only one that's over 200,000, and it makes sense because he's president and CEO, and he's a doctor. He's a veterinary, so I mean, it makes sense. And the others that are all VPs are all in the low 100,000, so. Makes sense.
that makes sense to me. I think I didn't pull it back up after my computer restarted, with its poor timing as always. But I had the NFL's 990 up just to give you some examples. And in this section, Roger Goodell makes over $30 million a year, and the remainder of his exec team are all kind of 5 to 700,000. So, right, I might argue that Roger Goodell was overcompensated that year because of the disparity between the remainder of his executive team. You know, you're looking for comparisons and ratios, and if it passes a general sniff test.
It's
anyone-
interesting.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, it's interesting for me, the CEO for CHOP, Madeline Bell, is making less than her assistant treasurer.
Oh,
They're both still making 2 million in reportable compensation from a W-2. But Madeline's at 2,009,000 and her assistant treasurer is at 2,532,000, which feels
that
like
is
a big
interesting.
discrepancy between, you would expect a CEO salary to be the highest paid executive.
But
That is interesting. I would want to look into previous years and see if that mirrors it. If that pattern is consistent, right? So if the assistant is always making more money than their boss, that would be an interesting pattern, and I would want to learn more about why that is.
maybe she started mid-year or something.
I have one in, like, on mine where it says president CEO left on a certain date and then president CEO, like a different one, so I almost wondered like, oh, well, this was for this part of the year and that year, and depending on when, it's like, that would make sense, they were there for 10 months and 2 months.
Yeah, that could be the case, but it's interesting.
Is anyone like blown away at how little their executive might make?
Not on mine, I'm just surprised, so the CFO only makes about $83,000, but everybody else makes around 200 to 300, and then the CEO is a little over 5. But like the person who's in charge of all the finances makes the least amount of money.
Is it part-time?
Yeah, I think the timing point that someone brought up is very relevant there, right? I mean, someone's sticking out, and I think the money person is well aware of everyone else's pay. So I think that might point to it, but good find.
Yeah, it's just really interesting.
I would look at prior year to see if it's still out of ratio, because that would tell you if they're, or if they were even listed on there the prior year.
Right.
Because that would tell you if they're a new employee and didn't work the whole year.
What organization are you looking at?
Junior achievement for like whole USA.
Interesting. Yeah, because I'm looking at the Desert Botanical Gardens, and there's a couple of folks that make more than the CFO. Of course, the executive director does, but like director of horticulture, like, would make sense because that's like a specialized skill set.
Right.
That's like hard to find, that's like really critical to their success, so it would make sense that they would make more than the CFO. But junior achievement.
And you wouldn't think like the CFO, COO, like all the C-suite would make
Similar,
But yeah.
because everybody else, like EVP, the SVPs, like they're all making 2 to 3 plus.
Somebody needs to be negotiating.
Right?
Unless it started working, you know.
Unless they weren't there, maybe they didn't.
Yeah.
Different words saying like,
Yeah,
they left in
unless the
December and they were job hunting and finding the right person.
Right.
I think the desert garden, botanical garden example is interesting because that to me is a statement of their values, that they really respect this horticulturist and their expertise. And, you know, the executive team is acknowledging that that person is the highest compensated. I'm sure there's a backstory, you know, there may be tenure, there may be other specialized knowledge, but that's interesting to me. So what I'll say about this section is organizations need strong leaders. Without it, it can lead to organizational failure. And, you know, nonprofit is a tax status. 501c is a tax status. These organizations should be led by strong, competent leaders. Again, I bring up hospital pay. It's kind of a beast, but we want our hospitals to be led by smart, competent people because our lives are literally in their hands. Next question, keep this moving. Who is giving / funding the organization? So now we are in Schedule B. The majority of the time, this information is redacted on the like free website portals. If the actual organization chooses to release their 990 from their website, this information, oftentimes Schedule B is still retained or it's removed completely. But you would find this to figure out where their donors are. So Schedule B, schedule of contributors, scroll down to the very end. I'm not sure if the version that I was using on Open 990 was redacted, but you would typically see the 501c type. It would match the very first page of the 990. I think most of us have C3s tonight. And then, you know, a little bit further down so you can see that this was actually redacted. So I can't, from the internet, tell who the largest donor is. What I'll say here, though, here's where you want to look for the organization's annual report. They may have the donor list right there. They may be giving up their own secrets.
So in this section, is there a threshold where you have to put it in the 990? Like if the person donated $10, it's not in this section.
Correct. I don't know what that dollar restriction is. You're obviously not disclosing the entirety of the donor list. I believe there's a dollar threshold or percentage that you base it on to calculate, or you might just take the top 5.
Okay.
If say, you know, all of your donors are 5,000 and under, you would disclose the top 5. I think that in that section, let's see. Yeah, it's not even on the 990 for JLP from ProPublica. So that would tell me I need to look at a different source, which might include the organization's website or GuideStar candidate. Does anyone have any information in their donor list? Does that surprise you?
The Desert Botanical Gardens has 6 listed, and there's a single individual, and now I'm like wanting to Google him, in Rochester, New York, that personally donated $487,000 to Botanical Garden.
That's interesting. So it's in under type D or box D, they marked person.
Yes.
Yeah, interesting. A lot of times, you know, so it is one way for individuals to hide their identity as donors, to donate through either a donor advised fund or say a community foundation. So a lot of individuals will donate through that, but then it becomes a organizational donation. You've already received the tax benefits and you've just made the distribution. One way to hide that. And so for that example, you may see either a PAC or a donor advised fund, say at Fidelity or, you know, your local community foundation, that would call it non-cash because it's coming from the organization.
Fun fact, Charles Berger is a photographer with permanent collection in the Museum of Modern Art and the Smithsonian. Wow. That's good.
Yeah.
And the final question, are there fundraising events? Why would I even want to know? Like, why do I care if the organization has events?
Maybe because you want to know that they are actively finding ways to sustain themselves into the future, and that you have a sense as to what their revenue could be next year, even if some of their grants or donations evaporated.
Yeah, so revenue mix, right? If it's a legitimate organization, they may have several events. You know, they may have a whole type of, you know, funding mix, grants, contributions, fundraising events. Think of a more evil, sinister view. Why would I want to look?
To be the cynic in the room, would I also look at this to see if they are maybe throwing gigantic parties for themselves and calling them fundraisers, but they don't actually raise money?
Correct. So this is that check for what I'm going to call founder ego. It's not always the founder, but it's really easy to overspend and just, you know, have a big party on a nonprofit's dime. So this is why in multiple sections of this form, the government's like, what are you actually doing with these fundraising events? You need to list it out. You need to show how much you're paying for people and how much you actually raised. So here, JLP's listed 2. I recognize these names. I think you all should. So you've got your rummage sale and Touch a Truck as event number 1 and 2. Both of them, you know, you received a little bit more than you brought in. You've got a net positive in line 3. So that made money, right? At the end of the day, even if it's barely making money, it's net positive, which is, you know, fulfilling the mission of friend-raising or fundraising, of what's the word I'm looking for? Of boosting the organization's stature in community or et cetera. So, and then C, I didn't put any box around it, but there were 4 other events that didn't quite total, you know, the 2 biggest events. So this isn't an activity that the organization takes seriously, right? There's lots of events, and number 1 is rummage, and number 2 is Touch a Truck. It may not always be listed in this order or listed in terms of profit margin, but that's how it appears to be listed in this 990 filing.
So this is 2020 when we didn't have.
Yes.
So why did the numbers?
Yeah, it was the spirit of rummage where we didn't actually have the free rummage we normally do.
Then they drive.
And then drive to yeah.
Different times, different measures.
Razors was like the virtual
Bingo, or no, trivia.
and
Maybe there was a bingo or something.
I don't know.
There was a
Those
couple of
events.
virtual things, yeah.
The flower making. Did they have
No, that was.
Or like the
last-
tea party?
No, that was last year.
Yeah, I mean,
The
this
tea
was,
party maybe,
this was
but
the
then.
beginning of COVID. There was nothing going
Yeah.
on. Is the problem.
This
First year.
was the beginning of it.
Next year's 990 is gonna
This
look
was
amazing.
2020, right?
From.
It started in 2020, ended in May of 21.
Right,
So but we did things throughout that year to
Not
try to, not much, but like, there was the trivia night that we did, there was some other stuff too, but to try.
this totally, it's.
Oh, it's,
It's very explainable.
Very explainable. Right? And that's ultimately what we're trying to get at when we evaluate this 990. Can you tie any sort of thread, weave any sort of thread through the narrative that's reflected in dollar amounts through this very boring tax form? So again, you know, direct expenses, net income, you want that line 11 to be positive. It could be a big number, it could be an insignificant number. It should be a positive. You might wonder if it's a big negative number.
So is there something previously in the 990 that would make them have to fill out this part? Because in mine, they don't have a Schedule G or H or whatever this is. G.
Look at the very first page, and it is, look at 16A and B. So that's the professional fundraising and total fundraising expenses. If they didn't have any fundraising expenses, it's likely that they probably didn't have any events. The trigger for actually completing this is part 4, line 18. So you essentially answered yes to, I have parties and fundraising events, and now I'm going to tell you about all of them in this schedule.
Yep, and they said no, so
Okay.
that makes sense. I was like, I can't find it. It goes from F to I.
Yeah, so, and maybe they took the approach like, it's COVID, we're out, bye.
Yeah,
Not this
one
year.
was 2018, which was the latest one on.
Okay.
Yeah.
That theory didn't work, but you might, others might see that. You might not have this schedule in the COVID year.
Jordan, would it be unusual or unexpected to see that like a fundraiser brought in money, but there was no expenses associated with that? Like, would I just assume that that means they got everything donated?
How big was the event?
It says gross receipts were 78,600, gross income 78,600.
It's possible that someone paid for it. Certainly, I mean,
It's a leadership conference, so I could see like maybe they had people pay to attend, but I would have thought they'd have to pay like a speaker or somebody. Maybe that was all.
yeah, you would expect maybe some rental or even food costs, right? Like a leadership conference, or
Right.
maybe it was virtual and they truly didn't even pay anything.
That makes sense.
You might want to look at a previous year to see if there were some, you know, more
makes a lot of
traditional
sense.
conference expenses.
That makes sense. All right, thanks.
So Schedule G Part 2, your event should be listed out and they should be making money. Not all fundraise. Well, I would expect they're making money. If they were on my fundraising team, they would be making money. If it was not making money, maybe the organization has a different perspective or view on fundraising events. We have completed all 10 questions. Does anyone have any lingering thoughts or stories they want to share, things that they learned?
There was a question in chat in the previous about members versus employees. I think it was Laura who asked it. When you were
Oh, it was me. I think that was just when it came up in conversation. I think my understanding, I when I saw benefits, I assumed that was employee benefits like healthcare and things like that. But then I think you clarified in your answer that was more member benefits that people get as members of the organization.
Correct.
Okay.
And I think for JLP, we consider members as a program versus members as a traditional dues paying member. So you're also contributing hours as volunteers. I'd maybe take a look at like a sorority or fraternity or even a business chamber type association. They would have member benefits listed in that line.
Is there any other questions? Was it full?
This, as the person who's responsible in the 990, this was super helpful because now I understand why CLA is asking all of the questions that they're asking and where it's going to actually go on the form, so super helpful.
There are certain things on there, I'm like, really? Like, what?
Yeah, some of the numbers I'm questioning, I'm like, how did we come up with that?
I know,
But-
it makes me think we're like, yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that.
I got some of these a little bit better than that.
Really? Yeah, how did we spend like 50,000 on St. Vincent de Paul when all we did was give them like 15,000?
Yeah, I hope today you enjoyed the presentation. Again, stay in touch with me. I'm very non-creative. So Jordan, the letter K, Louie, at all of the places. This is one of my favorite trainings to do because I think it's a critical skill for those who either want to get into nonprofits or even stay involved tangentially to really understand what the tax exempt status means and where you can find the information, because as taxpayers, we are offering essentially these organizations to not pay taxes on their business revenue. So, I work for the YMCA in the 80s. They were like all aerobics out, and the nonprofit status came up to question, like, is this really a social services organization? And the Junior League also came into question for that reason too. And that's why in various iterations of our mission, we say we are exclusively charitable and educational to combat any misconception. So stay in touch. It looks like Jill has a question. What's up, Jill?
Jordan, my question is, if there's an organization that excuse me, that I'm aware of that is not on this website as whatever it is, Gold Star, is that Guide Star, is that something we should be concerned about, or is not all 501c3s listed? Can you kind of talk through that?
Is it a new organization?
No.
What kind of organization is it?
I'm just going to say I don't want to go into specifics.
Is it like youth serving, like, for a fact it is a nonprofit organization? I think is the first question.
From what I understand, yes.
Okay, so that would be the first tell. Is it actually a nonprofit? Are they required to fill out the form? Because if they're not, that would be my kind of red flag. And I'll give an example. If someone mentioned Goodwill on the call already. So Goodwill, their nonprofit status, they do job training, retail job training, workforce development, and have these retail stores, right, that we all drop our junk off. Now, Value Villages actually is not a nonprofit. Value Villages is a for-profit company that a lot of consumers don't recognize the difference. And they actually went to court and had to pay a fine because they were representing themselves as a nonprofit organization without having that model. So I would call into question whether they're actually a nonprofit, and how you would check that is, go to their website, see if they're using that nonprofit language. Do they call themselves a 501c3 first off? Because if they are and you can't find the 990, that's weird. I mean, especially if they've been around for a few years and it wasn't just a calendar open source data issue. That's my guess. My second guess is that there could be something shadier going on.
Okay.
So, how you might look into that is you want to go to the organization's website. You want to start looking for the executives and try to figure out where and why they would start that organization. So I'll give an example. If I just decide that the Jordan Louie Foundation exists, I can seed money for my private foundation, but I may not actually go through the IRS red tape to be a charitable organization, to be that 501c3 or that 501c4. But I may be soliciting donations for my Jordan Louie Foundation without that tax status. So look into where they are claiming, what they are doing, and what that founder or organization may be motivated by.
Okay. Thank you.
Welcome.
Any other questions, feedback? I see in the chat, Jordan, just great training. Thank you.
Really good.
Yeah.
You're very welcome. Good luck. Have a happy 990 season to those on the board and who are watching. I think you can now look at JLP's next 990 and with a different lens.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. And thank you to everyone who joined both in person and virtual. This is also going to be recorded, or it is recorded. So we'll make sure to put it on our JLP library for those who want to watch this again and follow along. So thank you. Everyone have a good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
I had